May 28, 1940. Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. The morning light fell through the tall, arched windows onto polished marble floors and maps spread across a long oak table. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring stood at the head, his hand resting on the latest intelligence report. He read in silence, his lips curling into a contemptuous smile. The document detailed President Franklin Roosevelt's message to the U.S. Congress, calling for an unprecedented expansion of American aircraft production. 50,000 planes a year. Göring dropped the report with a flick of his wrist, the papers scattering slightly. The Americans are desperate. He scoffed, his voice echoing off the walls. They think such propaganda will frighten us. Let them try to turn their car factories into warplane factories. They'll discover soon enough that aircraft are not automobiles. His staff laughed obediently, but there was unease behind the laughter. Göring's confidence was absolute, his faith in German superiority unshakable. He believed the Americans lacked the discipline, the technology, and the will to fight an industrial war. But across the Atlantic, in Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving him wrong. A former president of General Motors, Knudsen had accepted Roosevelt's call to service for a symbolic salary of $1 a year. His mission: to convert America's peacetime industry into the most formidable war machine in human history. Where Göring saw chaos, Knudsen saw coordination. Where Nazi ideology saw weakness, Knudsen saw potential. Within 4 years, America's factories would exceed every prediction and crush every doubt. The impossible 50,000 planes Göring had mocked became nearly 100,000 annually. The United States, which had seemed disorganized and unready in 1940, would soon supply 2 global wars on opposite sides of the planet, the Atlantic and the Pacific, simultaneously. The spark for this massive effort came on May 16, 1940, as German panzers tore through France. Standing before Congress, Roosevelt spoke words that electrified the world. "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Skepticism rippled through the chamber. Even his closest allies whispered doubts. The year before, the United States had produced just 3 611 military aircraft. The entire Army Air Corps possessed barely 700 combat-ready planes, many of them obsolete relics. A 14-fold increase seemed insane. But Roosevelt was not asking for the possible. He was commanding the impossible. Bernard Baruch, one of Roosevelt's trusted economic advisors, was asked who could manage such an undertaking. His reply was simple and absolute. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. The Danish-born industrialist left his 300,000 salary behind and became the architect of the production miracle. He brought to war what no general could: the logic of the assembly line, the relentless rhythm of American manufacturing. By December 1941, even before Pearl Harbor, American factories were producing 2,000 military aircraft per month, 20 times more than in 1939. The Ford Motor Company broke ground on a massive bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle works. Douglas Aircraft multiplied its workforce overnight. The arsenal of democracy was awakening, piston by piston, worker by worker. In Berlin, Nazi leaders laughed at the idea. Their intelligence officers, steeped in racial ideology, dismissed reports of American progress. General Friedrich von Boeticher, the German military attaché in Washington, had sent detailed reports describing America's industrial mobilization. His December 1940 cable warned bluntly, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights." Berlin ignored him. When Boeticher met Hitler in February 1939, the FIHR ranted about American racial degeneracy, declaring the United States a nation of half Jews and half Negroes incapable of fighting or producing effectively. Hitler's prejudice blinded him completely. The same arrogance infected the Luftwaffe. Intelligence analysts dismissed reports of American women entering factories as proof of desperation, not strength. They could not imagine that democratic mobilization might outperform totalitarian command. When reports arrived that American plants were running 3 shifts a day, the analysts simply marked them exaggerated. To them, democracy was weakness, until democracy began outproducing them 10 to 1. The truth was taking shape at Willow Run. Built on Michigan farmland beginning April 18, 1941, Ford's factory became the largest building under one roof on Earth, 3.5 million square feet. A single assembly line stretching a mile from end to end. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, promised a B-24 Liberator bomber every hour. Skeptics called him insane. At first they seemed right. The first plane, completed in September 1942, had to be rebuilt almost entirely. Defects were constant. In February 1943, Willow Run produced only 56 bombers in a month, far short of the hundreds promised. Critics joked it should be renamed Will It Run? But Sorensen and his engineers refused to quit. They dissected the B-24's 488-193 individual parts into sub-assemblies, developed new hydraulic riveting tools, and created pre-wired harnesses for faster installation. Every month brought hundreds of design changes, 578 in 1943 alone, but production never stopped. By September 1943, they were producing 148 bombers monthly. By December, 365, and then in April 1944. Willow Run reached its promised goal: one complete bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. One factory outproduced the entire German aviation industry. The Germans began to realize it too late. In Tunisia, December 1942, Luftwaffe ace Johannes Steinhoff wrote in his diary, "The Americans are no longer amateurs. Most disturbing, there are more of them every day." The sky itself was changing color, thick with American bombers. On January 27, 1943, US bombers struck Germany proper for the first time. The Luftwaffe was shocked. By that October, during Black Thursday, at Schweinfurt, the Americans lost 60 B-17s and replaced them within 2 weeks. For Germany, the math had become hopeless. During Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, the US 8th and 15th Air Forces flew 3 500-bomber sorties in 5 days, devastating German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe lost more than 300 fighters, but the greater loss was its pilots, roughly 100 veterans in 1 week. General Adolf Galland reported grimly to Göring that Germany was losing 1 to 200 fighters a month but producing only 1,000. America was producing 500 and losing 400. The arithmetic was fatal. Major Heinz Burar, a German ace with over 200 victories, described the horror of a mission over Brunswick in early 1944. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon. At least 700 fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters. It was hopeless. The Luftwaffe was being drowned in aluminum. By 1944, American aircraft production had reached its zenith. That year alone, the US built 96 270 planes, 16 0484 engine bombers, 35 743 fighters, and 22 591 multi-engine aircraft. In a single year, America built more aircraft than Germany did during the entire war. It wasn't only numbers, it was technology. Each B-17 carried 13 .50 caliber machine guns, powered turrets, precision bomb sights, and advanced radios. Many German fighters took off with half-loaded ammunition belts and unreliable engines. At Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle, 16 flying fortresses rolled off the line every day by May 1944. Douglas Aircraft, which had employed only 68 people in 1936, now had 167,000 workers across 9 plants. North American Aviation turned out 500 P-51 Mustangs per month. Lockheed's P-38 Lightning line produced one every 90 minutes. While implementing more than 2,000 combat-driven modifications, the sheer momentum of production was unstoppable. Supporting industries kept pace. General Motors built 57 658 aircraft engines. Packard manufactured 55 523 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Olco's aluminum output rose 600%. Dow Chemical expanded magnesium production from £6 million a year to $333 million. America's industrial body was stretching to superhuman scale. The workforce driving it was unlike anything the world had seen. In 1941, women made up less than 1% of aircraft workers. By 1943, they were 65%. Over 3,000 women worked in the aircraft industry. At Douglas Long Beach, more than half the employees were women. One of them, Rose Will Monroe, the real Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with near-perfect accuracy. Women inspectors reduced defect rates tenfold. Ford redesigned tools to fit smaller hands, and in doing so, made them more efficient for everyone. Fatigue fell, productivity soared, and the myth of weakness was destroyed. In Berlin, the Luftwaffe's intelligence staff still wrote that female employment reflects desperation and cannot sustain quality. They could not have been more wrong. The American system was proving the opposite, that free workers, respected and motivated, could outproduce slaves by every measure. Nazi Germany's faith in coercion blinded it to the power of voluntary cooperation. By 1944, Göring's empire was collapsing inward. He approved the Jaeger program, dispersing aircraft production into more than 700 underground sites run by slave labor. The Mittelwerk complex, building V-2 rockets, used 60,000 prisoners, 20,000 of whom died from starvation and abuse. These factories produced as many corpses as aircraft. Sabotage was rampant. The scattered facilities made transportation impossible. Quality control disintegrated. The entire complex produced fewer engines per month than Ford's single Chicago plant. Meanwhile, America moved forward again. Boeing coordinated B-29 Superfortress production across 4 sites using modular construction and interchangeable parts. The pressurized, remote-controlled B-29 cost $65,000 each, more than a tank of gold by wartime standards, and represented technology Germany could not even approach. By early 1945, the US was building 100 of them every month. Then came June 6, 1944, D-Day, when the numbers became flesh and fire. The Allied invasion was supported by 11 590 aircraft. Germany managed 319 sorties. The ratio was 36-1. Between January and May 1944, American bombers had dropped 145,000 tons of explosives on German targets, more than all the bombs Germany ever dropped on Britain. Paratroopers of 3 entire divisions were delivered in one day by transport planes. More aircraft than Germany's entire transport fleet. By that winter, a single American raid could involve 200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustang, with its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, reached deep into Poland. German pilots called them Indians. They seemed to appear everywhere at once. The Luftwaffe was finished. By December, even Hitler's inner circle understood it. In his diary, Joseph Goebbels wrote, "Göring's promises of Luftwaffe superiority now seem criminal delusions. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Field Marshal Rommel told his staff before D-Day, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they come, they will bring such material superiority that no defense can hold." In January 1945, even Hitler admitted to Albert Speer, "We should have listened to Boetich's reports. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Speer later testified that American bombing reduced German production by 1/3 for tanks, nearly 1/3 for aircraft, and almost half for trucks. "The American attacks," he said, "followed a definite system. They caused the breakdown of our armaments. Germany's last hope lay in miracle weapons. The Me-262 jet, entering service mid-1944, was genuinely revolutionary, 100 miles per hour faster than anything the Allies had. Hitler and Göring believed it could turn the tide. But Germany built only 430 of them, with never more than 200 operational at once. The engines burned out after 10 hours. Shortages forced use of inferior alloys. Meanwhile, the US was already testing jets of its own. The Bell P-59 was disappointing, but Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star entered production before the war ended. America had the luxury to experiment, because its factories could build everything else in limitless quantity. Göring never grasped that total war was not only about invention but about multiplication. Quality without quantity meant nothing. By the time the Me-262 appeared, the skies above Germany belonged to the B-17 and the Mustang. When American troops of the 36th Infantry Division captured Göring on May 8, 1945, the Reichsmarschall still tried to project confidence. At first, he claimed the Luftwaffe had been defeated only by overwhelming numbers. But as the interrogations continued, the truth broke through even to him. At Camp Ashken, the facility for high-ranking prisoners, Major Kenneth Heckler interviewed him in July 1945. Göring admitted, "I knew your industrial potential was great, but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory, Willow Run, produced more aircraft than my entire bomber force at its height. It was incomprehensible." He shook his head as he studied American logistics maps. "You supplied armies across 2 oceans while maintaining full production at home. We couldn't keep one front supplied 500 miles from Germany. You supplied armies 5,000 miles away. It was beyond our comprehension." The enormity of what had happened in those 5 years defied comparison. Germany had begun the war believing in destiny. America had ended it believing in production. Behind the bombers and tanks, behind the legions of soldiers and sailors, there was something larger. A national will translated into machinery. For every American plane that roared over Europe, 1,000 minds and hands had labored, often in the dim midnight hours of a factory far from the front lines. At Willow Run, women welded in the flicker of blue light, their faces streaked with oil and fatigue. At Boeing's Seattle plant, crews rolled out bombers with hand-painted messages to sons and brothers overseas. In California, children collected scrap aluminum for Uncle Sam. In Cleveland, machinists who once built cars now turned out engines for B-29s. The hum of the assembly line became a kind of music, the industrial rhythm of freedom. Everywhere, small towns were transformed by war production. In Wichita, Kansas, a new airfield and factory made the B-29's massive wings. In Inglewood, California, rows of workers stretched as far as the eye could see, riveting panels beneath banners that read, "Do the job he left behind." Cities swelled overnight. Housing shortages turned cornfields into trailer parks, and trainloads of workers arrived from every corner of the country. America was building not just weapons, but a civilization of motion. Factories operated around the clock, lights burning through the night like urban constellations. Some workers slept in the parking lots between shifts. Absenteeism was rare, the work was exhausting, but it meant purpose. The war that had begun as Europe's tragedy became America's crusade of productivity. The numbers tell part of the story. 297,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, 2.4 million trucks, 41 billion rounds of ammunition. But the greater miracle was the speed. Entire industries shifted in months. The same presses that once shaped fenders now stamped armor plates. The same lathes that cut crankshafts now turned gun barrels. Engineers from every company met under Knutsen's direction to standardize bolts, bearings, and blueprints across hundreds of factories. A wing panel made in California could be fitted to a fuselage built in Michigan. Standardization, once the secret of Detroit, became the backbone of victory. Even Roosevelt's critics were silenced by 1943. The impossible goal had not only been met but exceeded. The president, who had once seemed naive in his optimism, had forced the country to believe in its own capacity. "Why must be the great arsenal of democracy?" he had said, and the people answered not with words but with work. Meanwhile, in Germany, the skies grew darker every month. Göring's Luftwaffe, once the pride of the Reich, was now a broken machine. The Fliegerführer system that once coordinated Europe's air offensives now existed mostly on paper. Every new German pilot sent into combat in 1944 had barely 110 hours of training. The Americans averaged 400. Aviation fuel, once abundant, was so scarce that many fighter units had to taxi their planes by horse to save gasoline. At the same time, Allied bombing precision improved. The Norden bomb site allowed B-17 crews to hit oil refineries and ball-bearing plants with deadly accuracy. By autumn 1944, Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Luftwaffe and Panzer divisions, was collapsing. Pilots were ordered to reduce takeoff weight, sometimes leaving half their ammunition behind just to make it back. In the underground factories of Mittelwerk and Nordhausen, slave labourers toiled under appalling conditions. The SS guards enforced quotas with whips and rifles, but the sabotage was relentless. Rivets were left loose, wiring switched, guidance fins misaligned. Every act of defiance slowed the Nazi war machine by a heartbeat, and while the Reich's engineers designed new weapons in secret tunnels, the Allies built victory in open daylight. The contrast between systems could not have been greater. Germany ruled by fear, America inspired by faith. When workers at Lockheed proposed efficiency changes, management listened. When welders at Douglas asked for better lighting, they received it. The result was an army of innovators. Efficiency wasn't commanded, it was volunteered. By the spring of 1945, the balance of production had become absurd. Germany, exhausted and starving, produced one's 200 aircraft that March. The United States produced 500. For every bomb Germany dropped, the Allies dropped 20. For every fighter Germany launched, 10 P-51s waited above the clouds. On the ground, too, The numbers told the same truth. American armored divisions drove tanks built by Chrysler and Ford, the M4 Sherman, in quantities no army had ever imagined. Each one rolled from the line with a stamped steel hull and a Continental engine, all made by peacetime companies turned warriors of metal. At peak, Detroit built one tank every 5 minutes. The last phase of the air war revealed the full reach of industrial might. The Boeing B-29s, assembled in Wichita, Omaha, Renton, and Marietta, were masterpieces of complexity. 141 feet wide, 4 Wright Cyclone engines, pressurized cabins, and computerized fire control systems. In Japan's skies, they ushered in a new era of warfare, capable of flying higher and farther than any bomber before them. While Göring's Luftwaffe disintegrated under Allied assault, the Americans had already moved into the next stage of flight. When the war finally ended in Europe, and then in the Pacific, the scale of American output left even Allies stunned. Britain, which had produced heroically, had made 132,500 aircraft. The Soviet Union, driven by necessity, made around 158,000. The United States had produced over 297,000, more than both combined. The men who had led that effort, Knudsen, Sorensen, Baruch, and countless others, slipped quietly back into private life. Knudsen returned to Detroit, where President Truman later awarded him the Medal for Merit. He accepted it humbly, saying only, "It was the teamwork of a nation." He never sought fame. He understood that America's strength had come not from one man, but from millions. For Göring, there was only disgrace. At Nuremberg, stripped of his titles and seated behind bulletproof glass, he listened as prosecutors detailed the crimes of the regime he had served. He still boasted of his early triumphs, but the words sounded hollow against the photographic evidence. Cities in ruins, camps liberated, an empire of ash. When shown aerial photos of Allied bombers stretching horizon to horizon, he muttered, almost to himself, no army could fight such a sky. The irony was complete. The man who once said, "The Americans build good refrigerators, not airplanes," had lived to see the refrigerators build the airplanes that destroyed his Reich. In post-war Germany, Allied investigators compiled reports on how industrial misjudgment had doomed the Nazi war effort. One file summarized it bluntly: the enemy underestimated democracy. The report noted that the American system, decentralized, competitive, often chaotic, proved far more adaptable than the rigid command structures of totalitarian economies. When parts failed, replacements were redesigned overnight. When bombs destroyed a factory, another took up the load. Flexibility, born of freedom, became the ultimate weapon. The psychological impact on Europe was immense. In 1940, Germany had seemed invincible. By 1945, it lay shattered by the very thing it had mocked: the inventive energy of a free people. Roosevelt had called it the miracle of production. But it was more than that. It was the moral victory of a system that trusted its citizens. In the ruins of Berlin, as American engineers examined captured documents, they found dozens of Luftwaffe intelligence reports warning of precisely this outcome. The earliest, dated June 1940, read, "If America mobilizes her industry under unified direction, our war effort cannot prevail beyond 2 years." The warning had been ignored because it contradicted ideology. To Hitler and Göring, no democratic people could ever organize at such scale. And yet, democracy had done more than organize. It had reinvented itself. The same open society that allowed dissent also allowed innovation. The same freedom that produced jazz, automobiles, and skyscrapers produced bombers faster than any command economy could dream. When peace returned, many American factories quickly reconverted to civilian production. Willow Run turned out cars instead of bombers. Boeing designed the next generation of airliners. The same assembly lines that had filled the skies with machines of war now built the wings of global travel. It was as if the country had taken the machinery of destruction and repurposed it for connection. But among veterans, engineers, and historians, one truth remained clear. The war had been won not only on the battlefield, but in the factories. In the noise of riveting hammers, the glare of welding sparks, the tireless turning of gears and mines. In time, even Göring's surviving subordinates would admit as much. In a 1950 interview, Albert Speer said quietly, We fought men who understood machines better than we understood men. For William Knudsen, it was never about glory. In his later years, he lived modestly, occasionally lecturing on industrial organization. When asked once what lesson the war had taught him, he smiled faintly and replied, "Never underestimate what free people can build when they must." His words echoed across decades, a quiet tribute to the men and women who, without firing a shot, had forged victory in the furnaces and foundries of a free land. The war had begun with Göring's laughter and ended with his disbelief. Between them lay the story of how one nation turned metal into might, and belief into power,